Oh, I'm still in my old screen. I'm recording this right after I did the last one. We're just going to continue. I'm still wearing my cool hat. Video 2, Organelles Part 2. It's Tiara Tuesday here at school, so I don't have a tiara, but I have a cool hat. I got animal pins on it. But let's jump right into it. I've rambled for too long. Talking about energy organelles, which really are mitochondria and chloroplasts, are going to be the main focus of this. And then we'll get into all the rest of the little organelles that are often forgotten. So, mitochondria. Probably all of you know in general what this does. We'll spend a ton of time with it in the next unit, which is cellular energetics. The mitochondria, though, it's the powerhouse of the cell, I'll say the line. It's in pretty much everything that's eukaryotic, specifically eukaryotic, not prokaryotic cells. It has a double membrane, surprise, surprise. That's a kind of a common theme of these organelles. And it has two compartments. It has the intermembrane space that's kind of between the two membranes, between the inner and outer membrane. And then it has the mitochondrial matrix, which is on the very inside, the innermost kind of compartment, where in the picture you see all those free ribosomes. We see, as a continuation from last video, compartmentalization and emphasis on surface area, where the inner membrane has all these folds that we call cristae. They increase the surface area. They provide space for the ribosome, or not for the ribosomes, for the, well, yes, for the ribosomes, but more for all the proteins involved in cellular respiration, putting everything in one spot, make it efficient. So, mitochondria does aerobic cellular respiration, which will be a whole topic in next unit. But quick overview, all you need to know for now is that if we have oxygen, then we break down sugar into carbon dioxide and water. In the mitochondria, the energy is taken from the bonds of the sugar and put into ATP, which we use as kind of little chunks of energy for all of our cellular processes. Cells will have a lot of mitochondria. They don't just have one or two. Depending on their function, they may have hundreds. Your muscle cells will have hundreds because they are doing a lot of work, right? They need a lot of ATP. Something like your skin cells, again, won't really have many mitochondria. Your blood cells won't really have many mitochondria, if any. Chloroplasts, the plant cell, special organelle, another double membrane. Double membranes are a huge indicator of a eukaryotic, more complex cell. So again, we have the inner and outer membranes, and then we have, in this case, a really narrow intermembrane space. I don't believe a ton goes on there. But inside the chloroplast, we have another bunch of membrane systems, and you'll see these they're like stacked discs. It's like stacks of pancakes with syrup connecting them, almost. These are called thylakoids. A stack of them is called a granum. Don't worry too much about that terminology. They'll generally define those terms and terms like that for you. But we get three main compartments. We get the intermembrane space between the two membranes. We get the stroma, which is inside of the inner membrane, but outside the thylakoids. And then we get the thylakoid space, which is kind of the innermost inside compartments. So, chloroplasts, they have a green pigment, chlorophyll, and a bunch of enzymes that help it make photosynthesis. Again, it's only in plants. Again, we'll talk about it a ton more next unit. For now, just know that it takes solar energy, light energy, and converts it into chemical energy. Essentially, it takes light, water, CO2, and it makes carbohydrates, glucose, as well as creating some oxygen. This is then usually given to the mitochondria, and cell respiration happens. Again, plant cells can have many chloroplasts, depending on where in the plant it is. Leaves have a lot of chloroplasts, whereas bark doesn't really have any, right? or inside the tree, like those xylem type cells, they're not going to have any chloroplasts because they're not even getting sunlight. So, this is one of my favorite topics in the whole year, is the origin of eukaryotic cells and really this endosymbiotic theory. Sometimes you'll see it called endosymbiont theory. I love the spelling on these subtitles. It's so good. Essentially, the idea is that early on, before eukaryotic cells existed, a prokaryotic cell engulfs and just eats some oxygen-using prokaryotic cell. So essentially, it eats another little bacteria cell that was good at making energy using oxygen. And instead of just breaking it down and digesting it, instead, for whatever reason, the engulfed cell continued doing its thing inside of the original cell, the bigger cell. And the idea is they eventually form this mutually beneficial relationship where the engulfed smaller organelle, now we know it as a mitochondria, the smaller thing gets protection, it gets a constant flow of nutrients, and in exchange, it makes energy for the cell that engulfed it initially. So over time, they get to the point where they're fully dependent on each other. We get to the point where the cell itself, the bigger cell, doesn't do really aerobic respiration on its own at all. It leaves it to the smaller cell, the organelle, the mitochondria, which then makes all of the energy but can't do anything else on its own. So this is kind of how we believe it happened. We will probably never fully know for sure. But there's a lot of evidence for it. The same idea basically extends to how chloroplasts would have been engulfed. It's the same idea. It gets engulfed, develop a mutually beneficial relationship. But, sorry, I'm skimming here. But what is the evidence for this? Why do we actually think the endosymbiotic theory is true? Again, just being that eukaryotic cells basically originated by engulfing other cells and just not eating them for some reason. So, what is our reasoning? First, mitochondria and chloroplasts have double membranes. Unlike pretty much every other organelle, except for the nucleus, they all have single membranes. So generally, if we see a double membrane, this is what we see if a cell engulfs another cell. Like if an amoeba eats something, the thing it eats has a double membrane still. Additionally, mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own ribosomes in them, as well as their own DNA that are circular. They have circular DNA that is separate from the ribosomes and DNA that the rest of the cell has. So essentially, mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA and have their own ribosomes. And the DNA itself is a different structure than the eukaryotic cell, which is very weird. Additionally, they are autonomous. Your mitochondria inside your cells will grow and divide independently from the rest of the cell. So they don't do it when the cell does mitosis. They just do it. So this is part of training your body and becoming more physically fit, is if you do a lot of cardio, you're essentially telling your body, okay, we're going to need to up the amount of mitochondria we have. So your all your muscle cells involved in breathing or whatever, the cells that make proteins for gas exchange, start making more mitochondria. The mitochondria start to reproduce, and then you start to be able to process oxygen and generate energy more efficiently. Ultimately, though, I hate using the phrase "it's just a theory" because that's a terrible naming. This has a lot of strong evidence. There's actually recent evidence that an endosymbiotic event has, at least in the timescale of Earth, just happened, like a few tens of millions years ago, where essentially they believe they've seen another case where a larger cell engulfs a smaller one and they develop a symbiotic relationship. In this case, it's with a larger cell and nitrogen-fixing bacteria. I'll talk more about that when we get into ecology, but it's really cool stuff. So more and more evidence comes out, seems to support this theory. Again, all these things